I want to take a moment to remind people why we're fighting for pharmacare. I met with countless seniors who have told me how hard it is for them on a fixed income to figure out how they're going to pay for their groceries, their rent, and buy the medication they need to stay healthy. I've spoken with seniors who've told me really heartbreaking stories about cutting their pills in half. Seniors that say, I try to skip my medication to make it stretch out more. Seniors that literally have to choose, do I eat today or do I buy and fill out my prescription? Those are decisions that seniors should not be making in our country. I think about this kid that I met. I met him on the Hill, a young boy, and he talked to me about being type 1 diabetes. And he said he's got to do all sorts of things to monitor his blood level, his blood sugar levels. He's got to take medication to stay alive. And none of that was a concern for him. What he was worried about was how much he was costing his parents. So for that young boy, for those seniors that I've met, we're fighting for putting in place a pharmacare program that's going to make sure they don't have to worry. They don't have to worry about the cost of medication. They don't have to worry about choosing between groceries or medication. Those are choices that should not exist in our country. They do, and that's why we've been fighting to make sure we move forward with pharmacare. Now, the Liberals are saying all sorts of things that are just not true. First of all, we've been fighting for the legislative framework, setting the foundation. We're not saying that all of pharmacare should be in the next budget. That's not what we asked for. We've been very clear. In fact, it's written clearly in what we fought for and what we negotiated. So they know that. They also know, and we know, why they have been dragging their feet. They've been dragging their feet. They've been stringing Canadians along for 3 decades. Let's not forget, the Liberals promised pharmacare in 1997. For decades, they've been breaking this promise. The Liberals, under Justin Trudeau, promised pharmacare themselves in their own campaigns, yet continue to break this promise. And they say the same thing again and again. Jurisdiction, it's going to be hard to work with provinces. It's going to cost too much. These are excuses that they've been giving for 3 decades. We're saying enough's enough. It's in what we fought for. We have given the Prime Minister a deadline, a very firm deadline. He's got to deliver this by the 1st of March. He's got to stop trying to appease big pharma and big insurance companies and put in place the legal framework that's good for that young boy, that's good for those seniors that I've met, to make sure we move forward with a universal coverage for all Canadians. So this is no longer a worry. We are fighting for that first big step forward. That's what we're fighting for. That's what the Liberals are well aware. And I've said to them, I've said to Justin Trudeau directly, if they do not follow through on this, if they break their promise yet again to Canadians, there will be consequences. I also want to take a moment to reflect on what's happened recently in Manitoba. And I just can't even imagine. I can't even think of the words to describe what's going on. But let us be clear what happened. This is gender-based violence. This was a man who killed his own children and his partner. We are faced with an epidemic of violence against women in our country. Many groups have been saying we need to call this an emergency, call it for what it is. My heart breaks for everyone impacted. My solidarity and thoughts to the family and to the friends directly impacted. But what we need to do now in the face of this horrible gender-based violence is commit to ending that violence. Je veux vous rappeler pour qui on se bat quand on parle de l'assurance-médicaments. On se bat pour nos aînés qui doivent choisir entre les épiceries ou les médicaments. On se bat pour bâtir un programme d'assurance-médicaments qui fonctionne pour les gens, pour les travailleurs, pour les familles, pour les aînés. Et les libéraux, depuis longtemps, ils étaient clairs, ils veulent plaire les grandes entreprises pharmaceutiques, les grandes entreprises d'assurance. Et nous ne sommes pas d'accord. Donc, on a donné une deadline, une date fixe, le 1er mars. On veut avoir un projet de loi pour créer la fondation pour un tel programme. Les libéraux vont dire ça va coûter trop cher, c'est trop difficile de travailler avec les provinces. Les mêmes excuses qu'ils ont utilisées depuis des décennies parce qu'ils ont promis une assurance-médicaments depuis 30 ans. On dit que ça suffit. Les excuses, ça suffit. On a maintenant besoin d'un projet de loi. C'est ce qu'on a forcé les libéraux d'accepter. Et maintenant, on a dit, j'ai dit clairement, Justin Trudeau, vous avez jusqu'à la 1er mars pour livrer un tel projet de loi. Sinon, vous allez avoir des conséquences. Et j'étais ferme. Finalement, je vais prendre un moment pour partager mes condoléances à tous les gens impactés par ce qui s'est passé au Manitoba. C'est vraiment horrible. Je n'ai pas vraiment les mots pour l'expliquer. Mais je dois dire que c'était de la violence basée sur le genre. C'était un homme qui a tué sa famille et sa conjointe, sa partenaire. Et on doit reconnaître que c'est un problème à travers le pays. Il y a une explosion de violence contre les femmes, la violence basée sur le genre, et on doit répondre à cette crise. Merci. Et with that, I'm ready for any questions.
Mr. Singh, can you please clarify if the NDP expect in the bill there to be a system for single-payer pharmacare?
Yes, what we have said very clearly, our expectation is, well, frankly, it's the expectation, not just my expectation, not just New Democrats, all experts, and in fact, the Liberal government's own commissioned report confirms the best way forward that's going to save everyone money. It's going to save families money, the kid that I talked about, seniors that are worried, provinces, the federal government. The best way forward that's going to save everyone money is a single-payer universal program.
And can you clarify if you believe that the negotiations are progressing and a deal will be in place by March 1st with the bill? Or is your sense right now that it won't happen?
My sense right now is I don't know which way it's going. And that's why I made it very clear to the Prime Minister that that's what we expect. And after that meeting, I said that it was a difficult meeting because I did not get clear assurances that this would be resolved. And that's why I'm saying very clearly to Justin Trudeau and to the Liberals, you can't keep on stringing Canadians along. You can't keep on breaking your promise. We expect legislation that lays out that foundation, and it's got to be universal and single payer. We're not saying the money's got to be in the budget. That's never been our ask, and we've never said that. So the Liberals try to spin folks and say that's what we're asking for. It's not the case. But we do expect legislation that lays the foundation, and that's what we're asking for. The Liberals know that. Justin Trudeau knows that. And we'll see what happens on March 1st.
Are you then ready for an election?
Est-ce que la conséquence, c'est que vous déchirez l'entente au 1er mars à minuit? Est-ce que quand vous parlez de conséquence, c'est quoi exactement?
S'il brise l'entente, donc l'entente est brisée, donc oui. Donc, s'il brise l'entente n'existe pas. Donc, tous les éléments de l'entente ne vont pas continuer d'exister. Donc, il n'y a aucune garantie qu'on doit appuyer les projets de loi, aucune garantie qu'on doit aider avec les passages des projets de loi. L'entente est brisée s'il les brise, donc toutes les conséquences sont sur la table s'il brise l'entente.
Can you clarify then, how do you said last week that just because the deal is broken doesn't mean you're going to let the government fall, you might still support them. So then you would be in the position of getting even less from the government because the deal's broken, you're not getting pharmacare, but then even though you're not getting pharmacare, you're still supporting the government. I just don't understand how that works. How does this not lead to an election if you don't have a deal by March 1st?
There's lots of alternatives, and I'm not going to get into the details here, but I can tell you, generally speaking, there's lots of things that the Liberals look to us based on what we've negotiated. And those things will no longer be on the table. We will no longer support passage of bills. We will no longer speed up the passage of bills. We're not like the Conservatives and preemptively going to determine how we're voting on a budget that we've not seen. So we're not going to say that today. We'll look at the budget. We'll make an assessment if it's something we'll support or not. But what happens if they break the agreement? Then there is no agreement in place. Then we are not entitled. We are not in any way required to continue to provide any support if they break their side of the agreement.
But does it not undermine your ability to threaten this government by saying, hey, we're not really going to threaten you to, call an election or to go for an election.
Everything's on the table. If the agreement's not in place, we're saying that none of our votes should be taken for granted. The agreement will be broken. If they break the agreement, they walk away from the agreement, there is nothing that they can expect from us then. We will negotiate. We'll negotiate every vote at a time. We're not like the Conservatives to presuppose and say we're going to vote against everything. We will make our determination based on each vote that comes before us. But with the agreement, we had in place a certain understanding that there would be votes would go a certain way. That will no longer happen.
Déchirer le gain que vous avez fait sur la loi anti-briseur de grève en déchirant l'entente.
C'est les libéraux qui vont déchirer l'entente. C'est clair. S'ils brisent leurs promesses, c'est les libéraux qui brisent leur entente. Et il y a du travail qui reste. On va continuer de faire notre travail, de forcer le gouvernement de faire ce qu'il faut, comme on a fait dans le passé. Le anti-briseur de grève, c'est un exemple d'une loi qu'on a forcé le gouvernement de déposer. On veut que ça passe, mais on va continuer de mettre la pression.
Singh, en ce moment, dans les sondages, M. Poilievre et ses conservateurs sont totalement en tête. Le site Canada 338 dit qu'il y a 99% des chances que ce soit un gouvernement conservateur majoritaire qui soit élu. Sachant cette perspective, comment vous senteriez-vous, vous, en tant que chef du NPD, de provoquer une élection qui porterait au pouvoir non pas des libéraux qui se traînent les pieds, mais des conservateurs qui veulent rien savoir?
Je mets la question sur les libéraux parce que c'est eux qui vont briser les promesses. C'est eux qui vont briser l'entente s'ils brisent leurs promesses. Donc, c'est la faute du gouvernement libéral. Il ne peut pas prendre pour acquis notre appui s'ils brisent leurs promesses. Il ne peut pas prendre notre appui pour aucun vote s'ils brisent ce qu'ils ont promis de faire. Donc, c'est vraiment, comme on dit en français, le ballon est dans leur cours. S'ils vont briser leurs promesses, ils vont avoir des conséquences.
Vous vendez ça à vos militants que parce que vous n'avez pas obtenu une chose, vous allez probablement provoquer l'élection d'un gouvernement conservateur, ce que vos militants craignent le plus au monde.
C'est la faute des libéraux s'ils brisent leur entente. Je ne peux pas comprendre comment c'est notre faute si les libéraux brisent leurs promesses.
Mr. Singh, you were saying single payer universal. Mark Holland this weekend on CTV said he's not ideologically wedded to that idea. Does it have to be that March 1st?
Yes.
Okay,
Single payer, universal.
As a
Mr.
follow-up,
Miller.
the amount of money that it would cost for what you are advocating is $40 billion a year. Yes, there would be some savings for taxpayers. However, from a fiscal perspective, that is the cost that Mark Holland said was clear and something that there is no fiscal room for. So where does that leave you in your party?
We have never, ever said that we expect that money in the budget. The Liberals know this very well. This is absolute Liberal spin. They know what we're asking for is a legal framework. It is written clearly in what we've negotiated and what we fought for. We want the legal framework to move forward. That's going to require, once we have the legal framework, we also said we know that's also going to require additional steps. We also need a formulary. We also need a bulk purchasing plan. That's all in what we've negotiated, what we fought for. They know this. They know this very well. This is not about spending that money in the budget. It's never been asked for, nor is it written anywhere. They know this. This is clearly spin. It's clearly spin. What we said to them is we want to put in place legislation that sets a framework. And now that framework, there's lots of ways they can stipulate that it's going to require additional work. It's not something that's going to happen next year. There's lots of ways to clarify for credit rating agencies that this is something that's going to require additional work. It's going to require additional steps to happen. There's lots of ways to address those concerns. The Liberals are spinning, and frankly, it doesn't make any sense. We're saying the legal framework has to be there. They know that. We've never asked for the entire budget to be in place. They know that as well. So again, this is the Liberals, again, doing what they've done for 30 years to Canadians. They've been saying, oh yes, we're going to bring in pharmacare for 30 years. They've been promising this literally for 30 years. Justin Trudeau ran on this not too long ago, 2019. It was in their platform. We're going to bring in pharmacare. Now what? We're actually having an agreement where we've written it in place and say, okay, cool, do it now. So they could run on it, promise it to Canadians. No big deal, broke their promise. Now we're saying it's in our agreement. We have forced you to now move forward with your own promise, frankly, which they've broken for 30 years. We're saying now do it. So now it becomes this big complex thing. Oh, now we can't do it. Well, how does that make any sense? You have promised it for 30 years. We're saying now do it. Lay the foundation of it.
Political calculus of
Répondez-vous,
a deal,
ministre
flying
Miller.
confidence deal with the Liberals. Has the political calculus and the benefits to the NDP changed due to the Liberals' sort of slumping poll numbers and new reality politically for the government?
This is never really, if you look at the work that we've done, this has not been about me or been us as New Democrats. We have said what New Democrats have always done. If you look at our history, when we have an opportunity to use our power, look at every New Democrat leader who's had the opportunity to use their power. What have they done with that power? Every time we've had power, we have used it for people. We've used it to find a way to give people a break. We've used it to find a way to lift up the people around us. We've used it to bring in things like universal health care. We used it to bring in things like EI, to bring in things like old age security. We've always used our power to help people. So that's what we're doing now. This is about people. This is about that kid who told me he's worried about how much his medication costs his parents. I want to make sure that kid knows I heard him out and I'm fighting for him to make sure that we can at least move in that direction. Take a step forward for the country towards achieving universal pharmacare.
How do you
I want
explain?
to make sure that that kid knows that, yeah, I heard you and I'm fighting for you.
How do you explain though? How do you explain to NDP supporters and members who last year demanded this pharmacare system as part of the deal? How do you explain to them that you would be willing to break the deal if you don't get it, but still support the government? In which case, the government would just be getting your support free instead of getting something. How does this not lead to an election?
We have said very clearly that there's lots of ways that there can be consequences. The Liberals, based on what we fought for, require or have asked for. You gotta at some point. I'll answer your questions. I'm happy to answer questions. But you gotta let me answer them at the same time. Like I'm not. Just a reminder. I'm not Pierre Poilievre. Pierre Poilievre would not let you have any follow-ups. Would not let you ask any questions like this. I'm down to answer your questions, but I ask you, if you do ask me a question, I'm going to respond to it respectfully. I appreciate that. If you want to push back, please push back. I appreciate that. I'm not afraid of that. But I do ask you, if I'm speaking, let me respond, because I'm not Pierre Poilievre. I will take the time to hear your questions and respond to them because I have the courage to do so. But then please listen to my responses.
Okay, but just to clarify, my question is on your credibility. It's not on the consequences for the Liberals. It's on your credibility staying on as NDP leader. If you let the deal fold, not get pharmacare, and still end up keeping the minority government in power.
So what I've said before, and this, it applies to the question the same way. If the Liberals break their promise and the agreement is broken, they've broken the agreement, then there's no requirement for us to continue to follow any of the elements of the agreement. That means if they need passage of a bill, doesn't happen. If they need something to be speeded up in Parliament, it's not going to be sped up. Those things don't happen anymore. Those are severe consequences, and we're no longer in an agreement. That does not mean that we will blanket decide how we're going to vote on confidence motions or on budgets. We may, if the budget is not good for Canadians, if it's not good, then we can vote against it. But we're not required to do anything. Like we did in the pandemic, during that period of time when we were in a minority government, we'll fight it out vote by vote. If there's a vote that we can work on that'll be good for Canadians, we'll support. If it's not going to be good for Canadians, then we won't support. And we'll indicate that, we'll negotiate that, and we'll make that very clear.
Répondez-vous, ministre Miller, que répondez-vous au ministre Miller qui laissait entendre ce matin que le NPD a des demandes déraisonnables en privé? Avez-vous des demandes déraisonnables en privé?
Non.
Non. Sont raisonnables vos demandes?
Oui, bien sûr.
What do you make of
Can I
his
just
comments
ask you
then?
about some comments you made here last week? You said that because the Liberals broke the original deadline for pharmacare legislation, that you would expect more. And in the coming days, you would have more to say about what that more means. So can you tell us what more are you asking for?
We've been very specifically general about certain things because we don't want to negotiate those in public. So there are some negotiations. We have said that, and that statement remains true, that we did expect more if they broke their initial deadline. So we agreed to an extension, one final extension, and we do expect more. I can't go into more details because they're still in negotiation now. But as it stands, we have made our position very clear. I've made it clear who I'm fighting for those seniors so they don't have to worry about the cost of their medication versus the cost of their groceries, for that kid who's worried about how much his medication costs his parents. That's who we're fighting for, and we've been very clear. We staked out whose side we're on. And the Liberals have, so far in their actions, staked out whose side they're on. They've met with, in the past 9 months, over 150 times with lobbyists from the pharmaceutical industry. It's clear that they have constantly chosen Big Pharma over Canadians. Even more recently, or recently as well, the body that determines the price for medication in our country had significant positions where people resigned because they were protesting the Liberals' constant favoring of Big Pharma. So that is their track record. We've made it clear where we stand. We'll see where the Liberals decide to end up on March 1st.
C'est quoi votre avantage de briser cette entente, en fait? C'est ce que je veux comprendre.
Ce n'est pas...
C'est quoi l'avantage pour vous là-dedans?
Si les libéraux brisent l'entente, on ne peut pas continuer avec une entente s'ils le brisent. Comment...
Votre avantage là-dedans, c'est quoi?
Ce n'est pas une question de moi, hein, ou à propos de moi, c'est une question de ce qu'on se bat. On se bat pour avoir de l'aide pour les gens. On se bat pour avoir une assurance-médicaments universelle. On se bat pour l'enfant de lequel j'ai parlé, pour l'aider avec le coût des médicaments. Si le gouvernement brise la promesse, donc ça veut dire que l'entente est brisée. On ne peut pas continuer avec l'entente.
Mais qui en sort avantageux là-dedans si l'entente est brisée? Vous parlez
je pense que les libéraux c'est une gagne pour les grandes entreprises pharmaceutiques. C'est la seule chose que je peux penser. Et c'est une perte pour les gens, c'est une perte pour les familles. Et une autre promesse brisée par le gouvernement libéral et Justin Trudeau.
There's lots of other things within the supply and confidence agreement that you would like to get out of the Liberals. If you can't come to an agreement on March 1st on pharmacare, are you willing to horse trade that promise that you want to have for other things in the deal to try and get other things done to keep it going forward?
We've really just been really clear that this has now got to the point where we had a deadline last year. They missed it. We agreed to an extension. If they don't make this deadline again, then they would have broken the agreement, and we can't continue with the agreement. That doesn't mean we can't find ways to pass other bills that we still support. That doesn't mean that we can't continue to put pressure on things like the anti-scab legislation that we want to see happen. We're going to continue to put pressure on them to follow through on what we forced them to do on dental care. So there's things that we'll continue to work on, but the agreement, as it stands, will be broken, and that will no longer exist.
Is pharmacare or bust by March 1st, the commitment to your members of the party that you're out on March 1st if you don't have a pharmacare?
Yeah, we said that really clearly. I've said it clearly today, that if they break their agreement, or if they break their promise, they would have broke the agreement. The agreement no longer exists. We're out of the agreement, and then we'll go vote to vote.
Has anything changed since
the
last
more that
week?
you're
Last week
asking
you were
for.
before us, you said the same thing. Has anything actually changed? That would precipitate this
No.
next press conference?
Nothing's changed yet.
Coming back to the more that you're asking for, Mr. Singh, I know you can't say what exactly it is, or you don't want to say, but can you say, is it pharmacare adjacent? Is it something totally different that you're going to be fighting for the people that you're fighting for? Or can you say that it is related to pharmacare? There's more that you're asking for.
Honestly, I appreciate the way you're asking the question because it kind of wants me to, because you're respecting the fact that I can't get into the details. I probably shouldn't go on. Pharmacare adjacent, let's say.
Can you clarify on the costs? What is a piece of legislation that would credibly be a single-payer pharmacare system that doesn't set up the federal government to eventually, maybe not now, but to eventually have to pay for such a system? Like, I just don't really understand how this wouldn't fiscally tie the hands of a future government, and if it doesn't, then what's the point of the bill anyways?
Well, it's the question I think the Liberals are trying to put to people is that it affects a credit rating, and it doesn't. If you can make sure the language is clear, there's lots of work yet to be done before we get to that point. And it does not have to be impactful on the credit rating because that's not our goal. Our goal is to lay out the foundation, lay out all the steps. There's a number of steps that have to happen after this. In fact, what we're doing is what was suggested by the commission that the government itself put forward. And that commission lays out that there needs to be legislation, then there needs to be a formulary, like what medication is covered, then there needs to be a bulk purchasing plan. Go on.
Legislation requires eventually the implementation of a single-payer pharmacare system. So just by imposing that legislation, you are setting the legal expectation for the federal government to create a single-payer pharmacare program. So it's not like that's not a tangible, real impact on the fiscal books down the road, right?
It doesn't mean, though, what the Liberals are trying to say is that it's going to impact this budget. It doesn't have
They're
to.
not. It's about future. Credit rating agencies and the PBO, they look at decades down the road. The point is that if you have a single-payer pharmacare legislation, even if it's framework, even if it's implemented in 2030, that still affects how can the fiscal balance of the federal government.
Sure.
Accept that.
Of course, I want to eventually have pharmacare. Yeah, of course I do. But I'm just saying the Liberals are spinning folks by saying that we want it by this budget. No, we don't. We're saying we knew that was never going to happen by this budget. But absolutely, we expect pharmacare. But let's be clear: the Liberals are not ones to talk about. The Liberals are not ones to talk about how they spend their money. Let's look at the way they spend their money. Billions of dollars in subsidies to oil and gas companies that are making more money than they've ever made in the history of their companies. Hundreds of millions of dollars to consultants where that money could have gone to the public service. $60 million for an app that the Auditor General says you don't even know where you spent the money. So yeah, they're not being prudent or responsible. Those are things that should hurt their credit rating. Those are horrible, bad decisions that we wouldn't make. We could put our money in a much better place. And in fact, there's multiple expert reports that say that pharmacare would save money for the federal government, would save money for provincial governments, would save money for people, for workers, would help take it out of the collective agreements. Pharmacare is actually a very smart strategy to bring down inflation. President Biden knows that. One of his major tools or one of his major fights to bring down inflation is to bring down the cost of medication. The cost of inflation is about things getting more expensive. Medication is getting more and more expensive. Bringing in a universal pharmacare program is an inflation fighting tool. So let's not let the conservatives and the right-wing economists win this argument here. Pharmacare is about an investment where we pool our resources and we lower costs. We can negotiate better prices for medication. Medication prices have been going up year over year, and they will continue to rise, unfettered. We've seen it happen. Canada is the third most expensive jurisdiction in the world when it comes to the cost of medication. So let's not accept right-wing conservative ideology around universal programs being bad. Universal programs are ways that we save money. And we've seen hybrid programs are the most expensive ways to move forward on things like medication coverage. We've seen in Quebec, it is the most expensive program. It costs a lot more, and those costs are not in check, and they continue to rise. Provinces right now continue to spend money on medication. The federal government spends money on medication, and that cost continues to balloon. If you've got a universal program, you use the bulk purchasing power of a nation, you can bring those costs down. It costs less over time, and it is in fact a cost savings measure. There's an investment up front, but I absolutely believe in it. I absolutely believe the government should do it, and I absolutely believe that it should be done eventually in this country, and it's going to save money for everybody. So I don't accept at all that this is a bad thing. This is a great thing, and it will actually save money.
Monsieur Singh, vous voyez par notre intérêt aujourd'hui que beaucoup de gens se demandent si après le 1er mars, admettons que vous n'obtenez pas ce que vous voulez, on se demande, est-ce qu'on s'en va en élection? Est-ce que vous pourriez nous dire, selon vous, croyez-vous qu'il y a une élection qui pointe à l'horizon ce printemps à cause de cette position que vous prenez aujourd'hui?
Je pense finalement, la réponse à cette question, c'est toujours dans les mains du gouvernement. Parce qu'on a vu ça dans les autres gouvernements minoritaires, dans l'histoire, on a vu c'est la même chose. C'est finalement le gouvernement qui décide s'ils vont avoir une élection ou non. Ce qu'on peut décider, c'est si l'entente continue ou non. Mais honnêtement, c'est la décision des libéraux, s'ils brisent leurs promesses. C'était encore c'est eux qui décident, c'est les libéraux qui décident de briser leurs promesses. Et ça, c'est pourquoi on dit, si vous brisez votre promesse, vous brisez l'entente. Mais c'est le gouvernement, dans mon avis et dans l'histoire et dans toutes les preuves que j'ai vues, c'est le gouvernement qui va décider si on va avoir une élection ou non. On va mettre la pression, on va se battre, on va continuer d'essayer de donner de l'aide aux gens, de livrer la marchandise comme on a fait. Mais je pense que c'est au gouvernement qui vont décider s'ils vont avoir l'élection ou non.
Il y a eu plusieurs fois dans le passé que des gouvernements minoritaires sont renversés par l'opposition. C'est ça la question qu'on se demande. Êtes-vous en train de nous dire aujourd'hui qu'il n'en reste qu'aux libéraux? Parce qu'autrement, vous allez mettre la pression pour qu'on s'aille en élection. Vous avez fait une entrevue fuite dans laquelle vous avez dit « J'ai dit à mon parti de se préparer à une élection ». Est-ce qu'on est en train de devoir se préparer à une élection de printemps?
Je sais que si l'entente est brisée par les libéraux, après ça, il n'y a pas la même stabilité. Et à cause de ça, c'est pourquoi on a dit qu'on doit être prêt. Et si les libéraux brisent leurs promesses, peut-être il le brise parce qu'il veut avoir une élection. Je pense que ce n'est pas une bonne idée pour eux, mais on ne sait pas. Donc ça, c'est pourquoi, quand c'était clair pour moi et notre équipe que les libéraux ne sont pas assez sérieux pour faire ce qu'ils ont promis de faire, on a dit qu'on doit être vigilant, on doit être préparé, parce qu'on ne sait pas ce qui va arriver après le 1er mars, mais notre position est claire. On se bat pour cette jeune enfant, jeune garçon avec lequel j'ai parlé, qui a dit que je suis inquiété par combien mes médicaments coûtent mes parents. On se bat pour la personne âgée qui a peur qu'elle ne peut pas se permettre de payer les factures ou les médicaments. On est clair pour lequel on se bat, et les libéraux aussi sont clairs pour lequel ils se battent.
Comment le programme sera financé? Comment le programme sera financé?
You continue to invoke these people that you are fighting for.
Yeah.
What is your message going to be to that child that you met on Parliament Hill? If on the 1st you walk away from this, when you are closer than you've ever been to having a pharmacare deal, and you walk away from it because of a March 1st deadline, what do you say to those people who say, but we were so close to getting it, if only you held out a bit longer?
I'll say to them, not surprisingly, the Liberals have broken yet another promise. 30 years of broken promises by the Liberals on pharmacare, and probably unsurprisingly, they've broken the promise yet again. I'll say to them, I hope you don't trust them again in the future. And I hope you know that if you do care about a universal health care that's public, if you care about universal pharmacare, you know that we have fought always through a history of our party. Myself as leader, we have always fought for a public healthcare system that's there for you, and we've been the ones that fought for pharmacare. And if you want that, we're the ones that are going to make that happen.
Comment ce programme sera financé dans votre esprit? Comment il sera financé?